The late afternoon sun painted long shadows across the parade ground of Maxwell Air Force Base, casting a golden glow over the immaculate uniforms of the graduating class of officer candidates. Technical Sergeant Olivia Ramirez stood at the edge of the ceremony grounds, watching as proud families snapped photos of their children in perfectly pressed blues. Her own uniform, faded from years of wear and multiple deployments, stood in stark contrast to the crisp attire around her. What made the other attendees look twice wasn't just her weathered appearance, but the quiet dignity with which she carried herself despite the whispers and sideways glances from the newly commissioned officers, who had no idea what the simple ribbon on her chest truly signified. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The graduation ceremony had concluded 30 minutes earlier, and most of the crowd was dispersing toward the reception hall. Olivia adjusted the worn cap on her head, smoothing back a strand of silver-streaked dark hair that had escaped her regulation bun. She hadn't planned to attend today's ceremony at all, but a promise made to an old friend had brought her to this corner of Alabama, despite her discomfort with formal military gatherings. Lieutenant Colonel James Harrington spotted her from across the parade ground and waved, his face breaking into a genuine smile as he excused himself from a cluster of senior officers. James had been her squadron commander years ago, before his career had taken him into the world of military education. Now, as the deputy commandant of the officer training school, he'd been the one to convince her that her presence today was important. "Olivia, you made it," he called as he approached, extending his hand before pulling her into a brief, professional embrace. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "A promise is a promise, sir," she replied, her voice carrying the slight rasp that had become part of her since the incident in Kandahar. "Though I'm not sure what good I'll do here." Harrington's expression grew serious. "These cadets have studied warfare from textbooks and simulators. They've never seen combat, never made the kind of decisions that you've had to make. They need to hear from someone who's been there." Olivia's eyes drifted to a group of newly commissioned second lieutenants standing near the refreshment table. Young, confident, with the unmistakable bearing of people who believed they understood what lay ahead of them. She recognized the look. She'd worn it herself once, before reality had rewritten her understanding of service and sacrifice. "I'm not a motivational speaker," she said, turning back to Harrington. "I'm just a tech sergeant who did what anyone would have done." "That's exactly why it needs to be you," Harrington replied. "The Medal of Honor ceremony was 6 years ago, Olivia. It's time to stop hiding." Before she could respond, a commotion near the reception hall caught their attention. A cluster of new officers had gathered around the table, their laughter carrying across the parade ground. At the center stood Second Lieutenant Braxton Carter, tall and broad-shouldered with the confident posture of someone used to being at the top of every ranking. "Is that what passes for a uniform these days?" Carter's voice carried clearly across the grounds as he gestured toward Olivia. "Looks like something pulled from a surplus store in Baghdad." His companions laughed, though a few looked uncomfortable with his volume. Olivia remained impassive, having weathered far worse than the mockery of inexperienced officers. Harrington, however, straightened his spine and began moving toward the group before Olivia placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Not worth it, sir," she said quietly. "They'll learn soon enough." "They'll learn now," Harrington replied, his voice carrying the edge that had once commanded a squadron through 3 months of continuous operations. Some lessons shouldn't wait for the field. As they approached, the group of officers grew quiet, recognizing the rank on Harrington's shoulders, if not the significance of the woman beside him. Carter, however, maintained his smirk, clearly believing his status as his class's top graduate afforded him some protection. "Lieutenant Carter," Harrington said, his voice deceptively calm, "I see you're enjoying the reception." "Yes, sir," Carter replied, standing at attention but unable to completely erase the smugness from his expression. Just discussing uniform standards with my colleagues. Interesting topic, Harrington replied. Perhaps you'd like to share your observations with Technical Sergeant Ramirez directly. Carter's eyes flicked to Olivia, taking in her rank insignia and clearly finding it unimpressive compared to his newly minted gold bar. No disrespect intended, Sergeant, he said with the false politeness that barely masked his condescension. But that uniform looks like it's seen better days. Presentation matters in the officer corps. A few of his companions shifted uncomfortably, but others nodded in agreement. Olivia studied them silently, seeing in their faces the dangerous combination of arrogance and inexperience that had cost lives in every conflict she'd witnessed. Presentation, she repeated, speaking for the first time. Her voice was quiet but carried a weight that made several of the young officers lean forward unconsciously. Is that what you think matters most, Lieutenant? Carter hesitated, sensing something in her tone that suggested he might be walking into territory he didn't fully understand. Before he could respond, another officer in the group, Second Lieutenant Madison Chun, stepped forward, her eyes fixed. On Olivia's chest where the simple blue ribbon with white stars rested among her other decorations. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sir, Chun said, addressing Harrington while her eyes remained locked on the ribbon. Is she? Harrington nodded slightly. Class, allow me to properly introduce Technical Sergeant Olivia Ramirez, United States Air Force Pararescue Specialist, currently assigned to Special Operations Command as a combat tactics instructor. The silence that followed was profound. Even Carter's smug expression had frozen as his eyes darted between Harrington and the unassuming sergeant standing before him. Several of the officers were now staring openly at the blue ribbon on Olivia's chest, their faces showing the dawning realization of what they were seeing. That's not possible, Carter finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's a Medal of Honor, Chun finished for him, her voice filled with awe. You're Sergeant Ramirez from the Kandahar extraction. Olivia said nothing, her expression remaining neutral as the group of young officers processed what they were seeing. The Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration, awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond. The call of duty. Fewer than 3,500 had been awarded in American history, and only a handful to women. Impossible, Carter repeated, though with less conviction. The Air Force doesn't have female pararescue jumpers. The Air Force has 7, Olivia corrected. And quietly, I was the third to complete the training. The group fell silent again, many of them now avoiding eye contact with both Olivia and Carter, whose face had flushed with embarrassment and confusion. Harrington watched the interaction with a mixture of satisfaction and resignation. This was precisely why he'd wanted Olivia to attend, though he hadn't anticipated such a direct demonstration of the gap between perception and reality. Sergeant Ramirez will be delivering a special briefing to your class tomorrow morning at 0800, Harrington announced. Attendance is mandatory. I suggest you all take the evening to review the case study of Operation Nighthawk Retrieval. It will provide context for tomorrow's discussion. With that, Harrington nodded to the group and turned to walk away, Olivia falling into step beside him. Behind them, the cluster of new officers remained frozen, their previous celebration forgotten in the wake of their encounter. That was unnecessary, Olivia said once they were out of earshot. They're just kids playing at being soldiers. They don't know any better yet. And how will they learn if people like you don't teach them? Harrington replied. You've been hiding your light under a bushel for too long, Olivia. It's time to step back into the role you were meant for. Olivia didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts drifting back to the mountains of Afghanistan, and the decisions that had changed the course of her life. The weight of the metal around her neck had been heavier than its physical form could account for, a burden of expectation and memory that had shaped every day since. "I'll do the briefing," she finally said. "But I'm not sure what they'll learn from me that they couldn't get from the official reports." Harrington stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "They'll learn that heroes don't always look like what we expect. That courage doesn't announce itself with a polished appearance or a confident swagger. And maybe, just maybe, they'll learn that the most important quality in an officer isn't the shine on their shoes, but the strength of their character." As they continued walking toward the officer quarters where Olivia would be staying for the night, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the base in deepening shadows. Behind them, the group of new officers had broken their stunned silence and were now huddled in intense discussion, several of them already pulling out their phones to search for information about the quiet sergeant who carried the nation's highest honor on her faded uniform. Lieutenant Chen was the first to find the citation, and as she read it aloud to her colleagues, even Carter fell silent with the weight of understanding what they had witnessed without recognizing. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty while serving as a pararescue specialist during Operation Nighthawk retrieval, Technical Sergeant Ramirez repeatedly exposed herself to enemy fire to reach downed airmen. Despite sustaining multiple injuries, refused evacuation until all personnel were accounted for. Her extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to her fellow airmen saved the lives of 14 service members. In her temporary quarters, Olivia unpacked her small duffel bag, methodically arranging her few possessions with the precision that had become second nature through years of deployment. From the bottom of the bag, carefully wrapped in a soft cloth, she removed a framed photograph, 5 men and 1 woman in desert camouflage, arms around each other's shoulders, standing before a helicopter under the Afghan sun. 4 of them had returned home, 2 had not. She placed the photo on the bedside table and sat on the edge of the bed, fingering the blue ribbon on her chest. Tomorrow she would tell their story, not because she wanted to, but because their sacrifice deserved to be remembered by those who would follow in their footsteps. Perhaps in the telling, some small measure of meaning could be found in the chaos that had claimed her friends and changed her forever. Outside her window, the lights of the base created constellations against the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, taps began to play, its haunting melody carrying across the stillness of the Alabama night. Olivia closed her eyes and listened, allowing the familiar notes to wash over her as they had countless times before, a reminder of all that had been lost and all that remained to be done. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the southern humidity already building as the sun rose over Maxwell Air Force Base. Olivia stood before the mirror in her quarters, methodically preparing for the day ahead. Her uniform, though faded from years of service, was impeccably arranged, each ribbon and medal precisely placed according to regulations. The Medal of Honor hung from its blue ribbon around her neck, its weight familiar after 6 years, but never comfortable. At precisely 7:45, she made her way to the auditorium where her briefing would take place. The building was empty when she arrived, allowing her to arrange her materials in solitude: a laptop containing her presentation, a small remote to advance the slides, and a bottle of water for when her voice began to strain, as it inevitably would when she spoke of Kandahar. At 07:55, the doors opened and the graduating class began to file in. Unlike yesterday's ceremony, they were dressed in their operational uniforms rather than their dress blues, a small concession to the practical nature of today's briefing. Olivia watched from the stage as they took their seats, noticing how their eyes lingered on the medal around her neck before darting away, as if looking too long might be disrespectful. Lieutenant Carter entered with the last group, his usual confidence noticeably subdued. He took a seat in the back row, his expression carefully neutral as he avoided making eye contact with the stage. Beside him, Lieutenant Chun sat with a notebook, already open, her posture alert and attentive. At precisely 0800, Lieutenant Colonel Harrington entered and moved directly to the podium. The room fell silent without any need for a call to attention. His presence and the unusual nature of the briefing had created an atmosphere of expectation that commanded respect more effectively than any formal protocol. "Good morning, Harrington," began, his voice carrying easily through the auditorium. "Today's briefing is part of your transition from training to operational readiness. You've spent months learning procedures, regulations, and tactics. You've mastered the technical aspects of your roles. But there's an element of service that can't be taught in classrooms or simulators, the human element that emerges only in moments of crisis." He paused, looking out over the sea of young faces. Technical Sergeant Olivia Ramirez embodies that element. 6 years ago, her actions during Operation Nighthawk Retrieval saved the lives of 14 service members and earned her the Medal of Honor. But the official citation, impressive as it is, tells only part of the story. Today, Sergeant Ramirez will share her first-hand account of those events and the lessons she learned that you won't find in any manual. Harrington turned and nodded to Olivia, who rose from her seat and approached the podium with measured steps. As she took her position, she surveyed the room, meeting the eyes of several cadets before speaking. "I'm not here to tell war stories," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm not here to impress you with tales of heroism or sacrifice. I'm here because every one of you will face moments that test not just your training, but your character. And when those moments come, the difference between success and failure, between life and death, often hinges on decisions made in seconds with incomplete information." She clicked the remote, and the screen behind her displayed a satellite image of mountainous terrain. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan. December 15, 2017. My PJ team was attached to a special operations unit conducting high-value target extraction. The mission was classified, the terrain was hostile, and the weather was deteriorating rapidly. Standard operating procedure under those conditions would have been to abort, but the intelligence was time-sensitive. The decision was made to proceed. Another click, another image, this one showing a helicopter similar to the one in her photograph. Our insertion went as planned. The ground team completed their objective. Then everything went wrong. For the next 40 minutes, Olivia walked the cadets through the events of that day, the ambush that had separated the ground team from their extraction point, the mechanical failure that had downed one of the helicopters, the communication breakdown that had left units isolated in hostile territory, and the decisions that had led to her entering an active combat zone alone to establish a collection point for scattered personnel. She spoke matter-of-factly, without embellishment or drama, describing how she had moved from position to position under enemy fire, administering emergency medical care and coordinating extraction despite her own injuries. She explained the technical aspects of triage under fire, the calculations required to maximize survival with limited resources, and the psychological impact of making life-or-death decisions in real time. Throughout her presentation, the auditorium remained completely silent except for the occasional sound of someone shifting in their seat or the scratch of pen on paper as Lieutenant Chun and others took notes. Even Carter, in his back row seat, was leaning forward, his earlier embarrassment replaced by intense concentration. "The official report credits me with saving 14 lives," Olivia said as she approached the conclusion of her briefing. "What it doesn't mention is that 16 people were involved in the operation. What it doesn't say is that I had to make choices about who could be saved and who couldn't." She clicked to the final slide, a simple black screen with white text listing the names of the 2 service members who hadn't returned. Captain Michael Reynolds and Staff Sergeant Darius Washington. I made the call to prioritize other casualties. over them based on their conditions and our limited resources. That decision haunts me every day, but I would make it again because it was the right call under the circumstances. Not the comfortable call, not the call that lets me sleep at night, but the right call for the mission and for the greatest number of personnel. Olivia paused, looking out over the now somber faces of the cadets. The Medal of Honor citation describes my actions as conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. But there was nothing gallant about crawling through dirt and blood to reach a wounded comrade. There was nothing intrepid about applying a tourniquet while bullets impacted around us. It was just the job that needed doing, and I was the one there to do it. She removed the medal from around her neck and held it up for the room to see. This isn't a symbol of heroism. It's a reminder of responsibility. Every decision you make as officers will impact the lives of those under your command. Some of those decisions will be made in conditions of extreme stress with limited information. Your ability to make the right call in those moments won't come from the shine on your shoes or the crispness of your uniform. It will come from your character, your judgment, and your willingness to put the mission and your people above yourself. Olivia replaced the medal around her neck and straightened her posture. I wear this faded uniform because it's been with me through deployments, training exercises, and combat operations. Its condition reflects its service, just as your bodies and minds will carry the marks of your own service as you progress through your careers. Respect the uniform, certainly, but understand that its value comes not from its appearance, but from what it represents: commitment, sacrifice, and duty. CapCut AI voice ready text. She clicked off the projector and stepped away from the podium. I'll take your questions now. For a moment, the auditorium remained silent as the cadets processed what they had heard. Then hands began to rise, hesitantly. At first, then with greater confidence as Olivia nodded to a cadet in the third row. Sergeant Ramirez, the young woman began. How did you deal with the psychological impact of the decisions you made that day? Honestly, Olivia replied, I'm still dealing with it. The military provides resources, counseling, support groups, medication if necessary. I've used all of them at various points. The important thing is to recognize that seeking help isn't weakness. It's part of maintaining your operational readiness, just like physical training or technical education. She nodded to another raised hand. In your opinion, what was the most critical factor in your success during the operation? Olivia considered the question before responding. Adaptability. Our original plan was invalidated within minutes of the ambush. Every subsequent action required real-time problem solving under less than ideal conditions. The ability to adapt, while maintaining focus on the core mission objectives, made the difference between success and failure. More hands rose, and Olivia continued to answer questions about tactical decisions, medical procedures, and the coordination challenges of the operation. The cadets' questions were thoughtful and specific, suggesting they had indeed reviewed the case study as Harrington had instructed. Finally, a hand rose from the back row. Lieutenant Carter, his earlier smugness replaced by something more complex, stood when Olivia acknowledged him. Sergeant Ramirez, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Yesterday I made comments about your uniform that were disrespectful and uninformed. I apologize for that. My question is this: what would you say is the most common misconception that new officers have about leadership in combat situations? The auditorium grew quiet again as all eyes turned to Olivia. She studied Carter for a moment before responding. The most common misconception, she said slowly, is that leadership is about being in charge. True leadership, especially in combat, is about being responsible for the mission, for your people, for the consequences of your decisions. The best officers I've served understood that distinction. They knew when to give orders and when to listen, when to follow protocol and when to adapt to changing circumstances. They earned respect not through rank or authority, but through competence and character. She held Carter's gaze for a moment, longer before continuing. As for your apology, Lieutenant, it's accepted. The ability to recognize and correct course when presented with new information is a valuable trait in any officer. Carter nodded once and sat down, his expression thoughtful rather than embarrassed. As the briefing concluded and the cadets filed out of the auditorium, many of them paused to thank Olivia or to ask additional questions about specific aspects of her experience. Lieutenant Chen lingered until most of the others had left before approaching the stage where Olivia was gathering her materials. "Sergeant Ramirez," Chen said, her voice slightly hesitant, "I just wanted to say that your briefing It wasn't what I expected." "In what way?" Olivia asked, tucking her laptop into its case. "It was real," Chen replied after a moment's consideration. "Not polished or inspirational like the leadership seminars we usually get. Just real. Thank you for that." Olivia nodded, recognizing in Chen's words the beginning of the transition from cadet to officer, the shift from abstract understanding to concrete realization of what service truly entailed. "Reality is what you'll face out there, Lieutenant. Better to confront it here first, where the only consequence is discomfort." Chen smiled slightly before turning to leave. At the door, she hesitated and looked back. "Will you be staying on base for a while? Some of us were hoping to continue the discussion over coffee, if you're willing." Olivia glanced at Harrington, who had remained in the back of the auditorium throughout the Q&A session. He raised an eyebrow, the question clear in his expression. "What will you do now?" "Yes," Olivia said, surprising herself as much as Harrington. "I'll be here until tomorrow. Coffee sounds good." As Chun left with a smile and a nod, Harrington approached the stage, his expression thoughtful. "That was quite a briefing," he said. "You had them hanging on every word." "They're still processing what it means," Olivia replied, zipping her laptop case. "The real test will come when they face their own Kandahars." "True," Harrington agreed. "But they'll face those moments with better preparation because of what you shared today." He paused, studying her face. "Including Carter, I think." Olivia shrugged, though there was no dismissiveness in the gesture. "He's young, confident, probably top of his class in everything he's ever done. The military attracts that type." "It attracted you," Harrington pointed out. "And look how that turned out." For the first time that day, a small smile touched Olivia's lips. "I was never top of my class, sir. Just too stubborn to quit." "Stubbornness has its uses," Harrington replied, "especially when channeled properly." As they walked out of the auditorium into the bright Alabama sunshine, Olivia found herself thinking not of Kandahar or the medal around her neck, but of the faces in that room, young, earnest, still untouched by the realities of service, but willing to learn. Perhaps there was value in sharing her experience after all, not as a hero on a pedestal, but as a flawed human being who had made difficult choices in impossible circumstances. "Colonel," she said as they paused outside the building, "that instructor position you mentioned last year, is it still open?" Harrington's eyebrows rose slightly in surprise. "The Advanced Tactical Decision-Making course?" "Yes, actually. The current instructor rotates out next month." "Are you interested?" Olivia looked out across the parade ground where new cadets were practicing drill formations, their movements still slightly uncoordinated, but improving with each repetition. Learning, growing, preparing for responsibilities they couldn't yet fully comprehend. "I might be," she said. "Send me the details." As Harrington walked away with a satisfied nod, Olivia remained standing in the shadow of the auditorium, the weight of the medal around her neck feeling, for the first time in years, like something other than a burden. Perhaps it was a tool, after all, not a symbol of past heroism, but an instrument for future guidance, a way to connect with those who would follow where she had led, the faded uniform that had drawn mockery the day before. now felt like a badge of authenticity in a world too often concerned with appearance over substance. Its worn fabric and dulled insignia told a story that no pristine dress blues ever could, a story of service, sacrifice, and the complex reality of what it meant to wear the uniform of one's country through hardship and triumph alike. The sun was setting over Maxwell Air Force Base as Olivia made her way to the officers' club where she had agreed to meet Lieutenant Chun and several other cadets for coffee. The building, with its dark wood paneling and photographs of distinguished graduates, exuded the weight of history and tradition that permeated military institutions. As she entered, conversations quieted momentarily before resuming at a slightly lower volume. Word had spread quickly about the Medal of Honor recipient on base. Lieutenant Chun spotted her from a corner table and waved her over. Beside her sat 4 other newly commissioned officers, including, somewhat surprisingly, Lieutenant Carter. They rose as she approached, a gesture of respect that still made Olivia uncomfortable after all these years. "Please sit," she said, taking a chair at the end of the table. "This isn't a formal briefing." The cadets settled back into their seats, an awkward silence falling over the group as they searched for the right way to begin. It was Chun who finally broke the ice. "We've been discussing your presentation all day," she said, pushing the cup of coffee toward Olivia. "Black, right? I noticed during the briefing." Olivia nodded, appreciating the observation. Old habit from deployment. You take what's available and don't waste time doctoring it up. "That seems to be a theme with you," another Lieutenant Williams, according to his nameplate, remarked. "Practicality over appearance. Function over form," Olivia agreed, taking a sip of the coffee. "In my line of work, there's rarely time for anything else." Carter, who had remained silent until now, leaned forward slightly. "About that, the briefing didn't go into detail about your path to becoming a PJ. There aren't many women in pararescue, as you mentioned." Olivia studied him for a moment, searching for any hint of the previous day's condescension. Finding none, she decided to answer candidly. "I enlisted at 19, she began, setting down her cup. "Came from a small town in New Mexico where options were limited. The Air Force offered structure, purpose, and the chance to be part of something bigger than myself. Originally trained as a medic, but I wanted more challenge, more direct impact." "So, you volunteered for PJ training?" Chun asked. "Wasn't that extremely difficult to get into, especially for women at that time?" Olivia's mind flashed back to the sweltering heat of Lackland Air Force Base, where her journey had begun, the skeptical looks from instructors, the whispered bets about how quickly she'd wash out, the isolation of being the only woman in a training class of 60 men. "Difficult doesn't begin to cover it," she said. "The washout rate for pararescue candidates hovers around 80% for men. For women, it was even higher. The physical standards are identical regardless of gender, as they should be, since bullets and bombs don't discriminate based on who's coming to the rescue." She described the grueling 2-year training pipeline from the infamous indoctrination course, with its endless push-ups, running, and swimming to the specialized training in combat medicine, halo parachuting, combat diving, and survival techniques. As she spoke, the officers leaned forward, their coffee forgotten as they absorbed details that went far beyond the sanitized recruitment videos they'd seen. "The worst part wasn't the physical challenge," Olivia admitted. "It was the psychological pressure. Being constantly watched, constantly judged. Every mistake magnified because people were looking for reasons why you didn't belong." "How did you handle that?" asked a quiet lieutenant at the end of the table, Nguyen, who had remained silent until now. Olivia considered the question, wanting to give an honest answer without sliding into self-mythology. "One day at a time," she finally sighed. "Focus on the immediate task, not the overall mountain. And I found allies, instructors, and fellow trainees who cared more about competence than chromosomes, like Captain Reynolds." Carter asked, referring to one of the names from Olivia's final slide. Olivia's expression shifted slightly at the mention of Reynolds. Yes, she said after a pause. Mike was 2 years ahead of me. Became my mentor when I joined the operational team. He believed capability mattered more than category. The group fell silent, sensing they had touched on something deeply personal. Olivia took another sip of coffee before continuing. Reynolds used to say that the most dangerous person in any unit wasn't the enemy. It was the teammate who valued their ego over the mission. He had no patience for posturing or politics. Just get the job done, take care of your people, and leave the grandstanding to those with nothing better to offer. She looked directly at Carter as she spoke, and a flash of understanding passed between them. The younger officer nodded slightly, acknowledgement rather than offense in his expression. What was it like? Chun asked, redirecting the conversation. After you completed training and joined an operational team? Challenging, Olivia replied. Rewarding, terrifying, sometimes all in the same hour. She smiled faintly. PJs operate under a simple motto. These things we do, that others may live. There's no greater purpose than being the person who shows up on the worst day of someone's life and says, "You're not dying today, not on my watch." For the next hour, Olivia shared stories from her career, the successful missions and the failed ones, the moments of triumph and the crushing defeats, the bonds formed with teammates and the pain of losing them. She spoke without romanticizing or sanitizing the reality of combat operations, giving the young officers a glimpse of what awaited them beyond the structured environment of training. As the conversation flowed, Olivia noticed a transformation in the group. Their initial awe at her mettle had gradually been replaced by genuine engagement with her experiences and insights. They weren't speaking to a living legend, but to a fellow service member who had walked paths they were just beginning to navigate. "Can I ask about Kandahar?" Nguyen said during a lull in the conversation. Not the official version, but he hesitated, searching for the right words. What it was really like, Olivia finished for him. She glanced around the table, seeing the same question in all their eyes. This was the heart of why they had wanted to speak with her, not to hear about training or routine operations, but to understand the reality of the moment when everything hung in the balance. Kandahar was chaos, she said quietly, her voice dropping so that they had to lean in to hear. Every plan shattered, every assumption invalidated, every system pushed beyond its limits. What the reports don't capture is how quickly things deteriorate when multiple critical failures cascade simultaneously. She described the initial moments after the ambush, the radio chatter, becoming increasingly desperate as units reported their positions. The smoke billowing from the downed helicopter, the knowledge that the extraction window was closing, with personnel still scattered across hostile territory. "I wasn't supposed to be on the ground," she admitted. "My role was medical support from the secondary extraction helicopter. But when communications failed between the ground team and command, someone needed to establish a collection point and coordinate movement." "So you volunteered," Chun said, more statement than question. Olivia nodded. It wasn't heroic. It was necessary. I had the medical training and the tactical experience. The decision took about 3 seconds to make. What followed, she explained, was 18 hours of hell moving from position to position under sporadic enemy fire, treating injuries. With limited supplies, helping wounded personnel navigate treacherous terrain to reach the extraction point, and making the excruciating decisions about treatment priorities as resources dwindled. "The citation mentions that you were wounded," Carter said. "How bad was it?" Olivia unconsciously touched her right side, where 3 bullet fragments had torn through muscle and shattered 2 ribs. "Bad enough to notice, not bad enough to stop," she said. "Adrenaline is a powerful analgesic, and we carry specialized medical supplies for self-treatment in emergencies." "But you refused evacuation." Williams pressed. even after sustaining multiple injuries. Would you have left? Olivia asked, meeting his gaze directly. If it were your teammates still out there? Your friends? The people who had fought beside you and trusted you with their lives. Williams looked down at his coffee cup. No, he admitted, I wouldn't have. Then you understand why the medal sits uncomfortably, Olivia said. I didn't do anything extraordinary by the standards of the people I served with. I just did what any of them would have done in my position. Except they weren't in your position, Chun pointed out gently. You were, and the choices you made saved lives that would otherwise have been lost. Olivia didn't respond immediately. Her thoughts drifting to the faces in her photograph, the teammates who had trusted her judgments in those critical hours. The living and the dead. The hardest part, she finally said, wasn't the physical pain or the tactical challenges. It was the weight of those decisions. Determining who could wait for treatment and who couldn't. Who could make it to extraction under their own power and who needed assistance. Who? Her voice faltered slightly. Who had a chance of survival and who didn't? The officers were silent, confronting perhaps for the first time the reality that their future commands might place them in similar positions, making life or death decisions with incomplete information under unimaginable pressure. How do you prepare for that? Nguyen asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You can't, not really, Olivia answered honestly. Training helps, experience helps. Having a clear set of principles helps. But in the moment, it comes down to who you are at your core, what values guide you when everything else is stripped away. She looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. That's why character matters more than appearance. Why substance trumps style. When lives hang in the balance, no one cares about the shine on your shoes or the crispness of your uniform. They care about your judgment, your competence, and your commitment to the mission and to each other. The conversation might have continued in this somber vein had Lieutenant Colonel Harrington not appeared at their table, his expression suggesting he carried news of significance. Sergeant Ramirez, he said, nodding to the group but focusing on Olivia. A moment of your time, please. Olivia excused herself and followed Harrington to a quiet corner of the club, aware of the curious glances from the officers left behind at the table. There's been a development, Harrington said. Without preamble. The Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service is conducting an emergency response exercise tomorrow, and they've requested your participation as an observer and evaluator. Olivia raised an eyebrow. That's unusual timing. It's not a coincidence. Harrington admitted, General Mitchell heard you were on base. He specifically requested your involvement. General Robert Mitchell, commander of the Air Force Special Operations Training Command, had been Olivia's strongest advocate during the difficult transition after Kandahar. His request was as much personal as professional. The exercise scenario, Harrington continued, lowering his voice, is based on Kandahar. They're testing new protocols developed from the lessons of your operation. The general thought you might have valuable insights. Olivia absorbed this information, conflicting emotions rising within her. The prospect of revisiting Kandahar, even in simulation, was deeply uncomfortable. Yet the opportunity to shape training that might save lives in future operations couldn't be ignored. When and where? She asked. 0600 tomorrow, Northfield. Training area. Transportation will be provided. Harrington studied her face. You don't have to do this, Olivia. Your scheduled briefing was fulfillment enough of your obligation here. It's not an obligation, she replied after a moment. It's a responsibility. If what happened in Kandahar can prevent similar situations or improve outcomes for future teams, then I need to be there. Harrington nodded, not surprised by her response. I'll inform the general. A vehicle will pick you up at 0530. As he turned to leave, Olivia called after him. Colonel, would it be possible to include some of the new officers in the observation team? It would be valuable experience for them. Harrington considered the request. I'll need to clear it with the general, but I don't see why not. Any specific recommendations? Olivia glanced back at the table where the 5 lieutenants were trying to pretend they weren't watching the exchange. Chun and Carter, she said, maybe Nguyen as well. They ask good questions. With a nod of agreement, Harrington departed, leaving Olivia to return to the table and the curious expressions awaiting her. Everything all right, Sergeant? Chun asked as Olivia retook her seat. Yes, Olivia replied, deciding transparency was the best approach. There's a rescue exercise tomorrow morning based on the Kandahar operation. I've been asked to participate as an evaluator, and I've suggested that some of you might join as observers. Their reactions ranged from surprise to excitement to apprehension. Carter, in particular, seemed momentarily overwhelmed by the prospect. Us, he said. Observing an AARS exercise? That's not typically available to new officers. Consider it an extension of today's education, Olivia said. An opportunity to see how the principles we've discussed are applied in practice. She paused, studying their faces. Unless you have other commitments tomorrow, no. Chun said quickly, we're available. Our formal duties don't begin until next week when we report to our assigned stations. Good, Olivia said. You'll be notified if the request is approved. 5:30 departure, so adjust your evening plans accordingly. As the officers processed this unexpected development, Olivia found herself wondering about the timing of the exercise. General Mitchell was not known for last-minute adjustments to training schedules. His request for her participation suggested something more significant than a routine evaluation. The conversation resumed, though with a new undercurrent of anticipation, about the following day's exercise. The officers asked more targeted questions now, focusing on the technical aspects of rescue operations and the KIGA, coordination challenges of working with multiple units in high-stress environments. As the evening progressed, the initial formality of their interaction continued to dissolve. Olivia found herself sharing not just professional insights but personal reflections as well. The difficulty of reintegrating after deployment, the challenges of maintaining relationships amid the demands of service, the ways in which her experiences had shaped her perspective on what mattered in life. In turn, the young officers revealed their own concerns and aspirations. Chun spoke of her determination to excel in a field still dominated by men. Williams discussed his desire to apply his engineering background to improving field medical equipment. Nguyen shared his family's history of military service dating back 3 generations. Even Carter opened up about the pressure he felt as the son of a decorated colonel to live up to family expectations. He always told me appearance matters, Carter said, explaining his reaction to Olivia's uniform the previous day. That how you present yourself reflects your attention to detail and your respect for the service. He's not wrong, Olivia replied, surprising him. Appearance does matter in many contexts. Military bearing, proper uniform, attention to detail, these things have their place and purpose. The mistake is in thinking they're the substance rather than the signal. She leaned forward, her expression earnest. Your father's generation operated in a different environment with different priorities. The wars I fought, the wars you may fight, require adaptability above all else. The ability to function effectively when everything has gone sideways and the rulebook no longer applies. Carter nodded slowly, absorbing her words. I think I understand now. It's not that appearance doesn't matter, it's that it can't matter more than substance. Exactly, Olivia said, pleased by his insight. Polish your boots, perfect your salute, maintain your bearing, but never confuse those things with the qualities that truly define an officer's worth. As the evening drew to a close, Olivia found herself reluctant to end the conversation. These young officers, for all their inexperience, possessed a genuine desire to understand the realities of service beyond the classroom theories and training exercises. Their questions had pushed her to articulate aspects of her experience that she had never fully verbalized, even to herself. "We should let you rest, Sergeant," Chun finally said, noting the late hour. "Especially with the early start tomorrow." The others murmured agreement, though their expressions suggested they would have gladly continued the discussion through the night. "Before we go," Carter said, standing with the others, "I want to thank you. Not just for the briefing or the conversation, but for showing us what it really means. The uniform, the service, all of it." The others nodded, echoing his sentiment in their own words. Olivia accepted their thanks with a nod, uncomfortable, as always, with expressions of gratitude for what she considered simply doing her job. As they prepared to depart, Nguyen asked one final question. "Sergeant Ramirez, what would you want us to remember most from today? If there was one lesson you could ensure we carried forward?" Olivia considered the question carefully, wanting to leave them with something of genuine value rather than a platitude. "Remember that the most important uniform you wear isn't made of fabric," she finally said. "It's made of your choices, your actions, your commitment to your oath and to each other. That uniform can never fade or wear out unless you allow it to. And unlike the one on your back, it's visible to those who matter most, the people who will serve under your command, and whose lives will depend on the person you choose to be when everything is on the line." The officers absorbed her words. In silence, their expressions suggesting her message had found its mark. With final handshakes and salutes that felt more genuine than formal, they departed, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that tomorrow's exercise was more significant than a routine training evolution. As she made her way back to her quarters under the star-filled Alabama sky, Olivia found herself thinking about the young faces she had just left, eager, earnest, still untouched by the harsh realities of combat, but willing to learn from those who had walked that path before them. For the first time in years, she felt something beyond the weight of her experiences and the burden of the medal around her neck. Purpose, not the frantic purpose of combat operations where every decision carried immediate life or death consequences, but the quieter purpose of passing on what she had learned so that others might be better prepared for the challenges ahead. In her quarters, Olivia prepared methodically for the next day, laying out her uniform and equipment with the precision that had become second nature through years of service. As she completed her preparations, her gaze fell on the photograph of her team that still stood on the bedside table, 5 faces grinning beneath the Afghan sun, unaware of what awaited them in the mountains of Kandahar. "Tomorrow's for you," she said quietly to the image. "For what you taught me, for what your sacrifice meant." With that, she turned out the light and settled into the familiar ritual of pre-mission rest, not quite sleep, but the disciplined stillness that allowed body and mind to prepare for what lay ahead. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for the first time in years, Olivia felt ready to face not just the echoes of her past, but the possibility of a future where those experiences might serve a purpose beyond the battlefield. Outside her window, the lights of Maxwell Air Force Base created their own constellation against the darkness, a reminder of the continuous cycle of training and service that had shaped generations of airmen before her and would continue long after she was gone. In that continuity, perhaps, lay the true meaning of the medal she carried, not as a symbol of individual heroism, but as a link in a chain of service that stretched backward into history and forward into a future she was helping to shape through the young officers who would carry her lessons into their own commands. With that thought, Olivia finally allowed herself to sleep, the weight of the day's conversations and the anticipation of tomorrow's exercise settling into a quiet resolve that felt, for the first time in years, like peace. The pre-dawn darkness shrouded Maxwell Air Force Base in silence as Olivia stepped outside her quarters at precisely 0515. The air held the crisp chill of early morning, carrying the scent of pine and aviation fuel that seemed universal to military installations worldwide. She wore her operational uniform today, the practical, subdued attire of someone focused on function rather than appearance. The Medal of Honor remained in its case, left behind for an exercise where its weight would serve no purpose. A military vehicle waited at the curb, its engine idling quietly. Lieutenant Chun stood beside it, somehow managing to look alert despite the early hour. Behind her, Lieutenant Carter suppressed a yawn while Lieutenant Nguyen checked something. On his tablet, his expression focused despite the darkness. "Good morning, Sergeant," Chun said, snapping to attention as Olivia approached. "At ease," Olivia replied automatically. "You're all punctual. Good start." The opportunity to observe an IRS exercise is rare, especially for new officers. Carter opened the vehicle's door with a nod of respect that contained none of his former condescension. "We received the briefing materials last night, Sergeant. Fascinating adaptation of the Kandahar scenario." As they settled into the vehicle and began the drive toward North Field, Olivia noticed the subtle changes in the three officers since their conversation the previous evening. Their questions were more specific, their observations more focused. They had begun the transition from abstract understanding to practical application, from knowing about leadership to preparing to lead. The exercise today isn't just about tactical procedures, Olivia explained as they traveled through the sleeping base. It's about decision-making under pressure. The technical aspects of rescue operations are important, but the human element, judgment, communication, adaptability, that's what determines success or failure when standard protocols break down. Chun nodded, her expression thoughtful. Like Kandahar, Olivia agreed. But hopefully with the benefit of lessons learned from our experience. As they approached North Field, the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky, revealing the scale of the operation unfolding before them. Two HH-SO Pavehawk helicopters sat on the tarmac, their crews conducting pre-flight checks with methodical precision. Nearby, a group of pararescue specialists checked medical equipment and communication gear, their movements reflecting years of training and operational experience. The vehicle stopped at a command post, a portable structure, erected at the edge of the field with clear sightlines to the operational area. As they exited, a tall figure emerged from the command post and strode toward them with purpose. General Robert Mitchell had the weathered features of someone who had spent decades in the most demanding environments the Air Force could offer. Before ascending to command, he had been a PJ himself with multiple combat deployments and rescue operations. To his credit, his salt and pepper hair was cropped close, and the lines around his eyes spoke of both hardship and humor. "Sergeant Ramirez," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for joining us on such short notice." "General," Olivia replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Wouldn't have missed it." Mitchell turned to the three lieutenants who had snapped to attention. At his approach, "At ease," he said. "I understand you've been learning from Sergeant Ramirez. Good. Today's exercise will put theory into practice. You'll observe from the command post, where you'll have access to all communications and real-time video feeds." As they made their way to the command post, Mitchell fell in beside Olivia, lowering his voice. "This isn't just a training exercise. The protocols we're testing today are being considered for implementation across all Special Operations Rescue Units. Your insights could shape the future of how we conduct these operations." Olivia nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility his words carried. "I'll provide honest assessment, sir. Good and bad." "I'd expect nothing less," Mitchell replied with a brief smile. "That's why you're here." Inside the command post, multiple screens displayed different aspects of the operational area, a simulated mountain range constructed on the far side of North Field, complete with rocky terrain, dense vegetation, and structures representing a remote village. The level of detail was impressive, designed to create realistic conditions for the rescue teams to navigate. The scenario, Mitchell explained to the group, involves a downed aircraft carrying 8 personnel scattered across hostile territory. With varying injuries, communication is limited, weather is deteriorating, and intelligence suggests enemy forces are moving to capture isolated personnel. Olivia studied the terrain model, recognizing elements of the Kandahar operation integrated into the exercise design. Rules of engagement? She asked. Realistic, Mitchell replied. The opposition force has live simulation weapons and is incentivized to succeed. Our teams are operating under combat protocols with full medical and extraction capabilities, though obviously without live ammunition. As the briefing continued, Olivia observed the 3 lieutenants absorbing every detail, their expressions intense as they studied maps, equipment loadouts, and team compositions. This was education of a different sort than classroom lectures, or even her personal accounts. This was seeing the machinery of combat rescue in motion, understanding the complex choreography required to snatch lives from the jaws of disaster. The exercise begins in 15 minutes, Mitchell concluded. Sergeant Ramirez will provide real-time assessment of decisions and actions based on her operational experience. Lieutenants, you are here to observe and learn, not to interject or advise. Questions? There were none. The group moved to their designated observation stations as final preparations were completed on the field. Olivia positioned herself where she could see both the operational area and the command screens, her mind already analyzing the team compositions and equipment choices. At precisely 0630, a flare shot into the lightning sky and the exercise began. The Pave Hawks lifted off in perfect synchronization, banking sharply as they headed toward the simulated crash sites. Below, the rescue teams moved into position, their communication chatter crisp and professional as they established initial parameters. For the next 2 hours, Olivia watched as the scenario unfolded first according to plan, then with deliberate complications introduced by the exercise. Controllers. A medical evacuation route became compromised. Communication systems failed at critical moments. Weather conditions deteriorated, limiting visibility and extraction options. Through it all, the rescue teams adapted and responded, making real-time decisions that reflected their training and experience. Mitchell stood beside Olivia, occasionally making notes, but more often watching her reactions to the decisions being made on the ground. The lieutenants remained silent as instructed, their focus absolute as they witnessed the practical application of concepts they had previously encountered only in theory. They're making good progress, Mitchell observed as the first casualties were secured and moved toward extraction points. The new communication protocols seemed to be holding even under interference. Olivia nodded, but her attention had focused on a developing situation near the far edge of the operational area. One team had become separated during a simulated enemy contact, with 2 members now isolated in difficult terrain. The team leader was facing a decision remarkably similar to one Olivia had confronted in Kandahar, whether to divert resources to retrieve the isolated personnel, or to continue with the primary extraction of already secured casualties. Watch this, she said quietly to the lieutenants. This is where theory meets reality. The radio crackled with increased chatter as the situation developed. The team leader's voice remained calm despite the pressure, methodically gathering information and assessing options. Minutes ticked by precious time in a real-world scenario where every second could mean the difference between life and death. Finally, the decision came. Command Rescue 1, diverting Team Bravo to retrieve isolated personnel. Requesting extended coverage from Overwatch to maintain primary extraction timeline. Olivia nodded slightly, approval in her expression. He's splitting the difference, she explained to the lieutenants. committing minimum necessary resources to the isolated personnel while maintaining momentum on the primary mission. It's a calculated risk, but one that addresses both imperatives without sacrificing either. Would you have made the same call? Chun asked quietly. Yes, Olivia said after a moment's consideration. Though in Kandahar, we didn't have the luxury of additional assets for overwatch. Every decision came with steeper trade-offs. As the exercise continued, the rescue teams encountered further complications, a simulated medical emergency requiring field surgery, a change in enemy, tactics that threatened their extraction route, weather conditions that forced the helicopters to adjust their approach patterns. Through each challenge, Olivia provided quiet commentary to the lieutenants, highlighting the decision points and evaluating the choices made by the teams on the ground. Notice how they're adapting the protocols to fit the situation, not trying to force the situation to fit the protocols, she said as one team improvised a medical evacuation using unorthodox methods. That's the difference between training and education. Training tells you what to do in expected situations. Education gives you the principles to apply when the unexpected happens. Carter nodded, his expression thoughtful. It's about understanding the why behind the what. Exactly, Olivia agreed. When you understand why procedures exist, you can intelligently modify them when circumstances demand it. Without that understanding, you're just following recipes and hoping they apply to whatever situation you encounter. As the exercise entered its final phase, with all casualties secured and moving toward extraction, General Mitchell turned to Olivia with a raised eyebrow. Assessment? Olivia considered her response carefully, aware that her evaluation would influence the implementation of these protocols across multiple units. CapCut AI voice-ready text. The communication redundancies are a significant improvement, she began. The team leaders had options when primary systems failed, which prevented the cascade of isolation we experienced in Kandahar, she pointed to one of the screens showing the medical treatment area. The forward surgical capability made a critical difference in several scenarios. In a real-world operation, that could translate to significantly improved survival rates for the most severely wounded. Mitchell nodded, making notes as she spoke. Areas for improvement? The decision tree for isolated personnel recovery still needs refinement, Olivia said without hesitation. The team leaders handled it well today, but the protocols themselves don't provide sufficient guidance for prioritization when resources are severely constrained. She gestured toward the terrain model. Also, the cross-team coordination was effective, but relied heavily on command post facilitation. In situations where command communication is compromised, there needs to be clearer doctrine for direct coordination between teams operating in proximity. Mitchell continued to make notes, his expression indicating neither agreement nor disagreement, but serious consideration of her points. Anything else? Olivia hesitated, then decided candor was necessary. The psychological dimension is underrepresented in the exercise design. In real operations, stress, fear, and emotional responses to casualties, particularly when they involve teammates or friends, significantly impact decision-making. It's difficult to simulate, but critical to account for in protocol development. The general's expression shifted slightly, a flash of old pain crossing his features before his professional mask returned. He had lost people too, Olivia remembered. He understood the weight of those moments in ways classroom theorists never could. Noted, he said simply. We'll address that in the next iteration. As the exercise concluded and the teams began their debriefing processes, Mitchell turned to the three lieutenants who had observed in silent attention throughout the operation. Your impressions? He asked, his tone making it clear this was not a casual inquiry but a professional assessment. Three exchanged glances before Chun spoke first. The integration of multiple specialties into unified teams was impressive, sir. The medical personnel, extraction specialists, and security elements operated as a cohesive unit, despite their different focus areas. Mitchell nodded, turning to Nguyen. "The communication discipline stood out to me, General," he said. "Even when systems failed or situations changed rapidly, the teams maintained clear, concise information flow without unnecessary chatter. That discipline seemed to directly impact the efficiency of their decision-making." "Lieutenant Carter?" Mitchell prompted. Carter straightened slightly. "Sir, what struck me most was the leadership style of the team leaders. They provided clear direction without micromanaging, trusted their specialists to perform their roles, and adapted their plans based on ground truth rather than preconceptions. They led from the front without losing perspective on the overall operation." Mitchell studied him for a moment before nodding in apparent approval. "Well observed, all of you." He checked his watch. "The teams will conduct their internal debriefs. Now we'll reconvene at 1100 for the joint assessment. Sergeant Ramirez, I'd like you to address the combined teams at that time." With that, he departed to oversee the debriefing process, leaving Olivia with the 3 lieutenants in the gradually emptying command post. That was ... Nguyen began, searching for adequate words. "Intense," Chun supplied. "Even as an exercise." The pressure was palpable. Carter nodded agreement. "And knowing that these were simulated casualties with simulated injuries in a controlled environment. In real operations with actual lives at stake and genuine threats. That's the reality of the job," Olivia said simply. "Every decision carries weight. Every action or inaction has consequences. The pressure never diminishes, you just develop better tools for functioning under it." She led them outside where the morning sun had now risen fully, casting long shadows. Across the operational area where teams were recovering equipment and resetting scenarios for future exercises. The practical machinery of military training continued its relentless cycle, preparing people for circumstances they hoped would never arise, but had to be ready to face. "What will you tell them?" Chun asked as they watched the activity. "At the joint assessment," Olivia considered the question. "The truth," she finally said. "That they performed well under the constraints of the exercise. That the protocols show promise but require refinement. That no training scenario, however well designed, can fully prepare them for the reality of combat rescue operations." "Will you talk about Kandahar?" Carter asked quietly. "Not directly," Olivia replied. "The lesson of Kandahar isn't about that specific operation. It's about the fundamental nature of our profession. When everything goes wrong simultaneously, when every system fails and every plan collapses, what remains is the human element: judgment, courage, commitment to the mission and to each other." She turned to face the 3 officers directly. "That's what you need to understand as you begin your commands. Technology fails, communications fail, equipment fails, weather intervenes, enemy action disrupts. In those moments, the only thing your people can rely on is you, your decision-making, your leadership, your willingness to put the mission and their welfare above your own comfort and safety." The lieutenants absorbed her words in silence, their expressions reflecting the gravity of the responsibility she described. It was one thing to understand command as an abstract concept taught in classrooms. It was another to confront the reality of what it meant to hold others' lives in their hands. "It's a heavy burden," Nguyen finally said, his voice quiet. "It is," Olivia agreed, without hesitation. "But it's also a profound privilege. To be entrusted with the lives and welfare of others, to lead them through the most challenging circumstances. Our profession can present, there's no greater responsibility and no deeper honor." As they made their way toward the debriefing area, Olivia found herself studying the 3 young officers with new eyes. Yesterday, she had seen them primarily in terms of their limitations, their inexperience, their untested theories, their polished appearances unmarked by the harsh realities of combat. Today, she saw their potential, the leaders they might become if they embraced the lessons of this experience and carried them forward into their commands. The joint assessment began. Precisely at 1100 in a large hangar repurposed as a briefing area. The rescue teams, parascumen, combat controllers, helicopter crews, and support personnel gathered in ordered groups, their expressions reflecting the focused professionalism of people accustomed to evaluating their performance with ruthless honesty. General Mitchell opened the session with a brief overview of the exercise objectives and initial observations. He praised the team's adaptability and highlighted specific instances where innovative solutions had overcome designed obstacles. Then, without lengthy introduction, he turned the floor over to Olivia. "Some of you know Technical Sergeant Ramirez," he said simply. "For those who don't, she's one of only 3 pararescue specialists to receive the Medal of Honor since Vietnam. Her experience in Kandahar directly informed the protocols you tested today. Her assessment deserves your full attention." As Olivia moved to the front of the room, she was acutely aware of the eyes following her, not with the awe or curiosity she had grown accustomed to after the medal, but with the focused attention of professionals evaluating a peer whose experience might contain valuable lessons for their own operations. "First," she began without preamble, "you performed well under the parameters of the exercise. The teams demonstrated effective integration, communication discipline, and adaptive decision-making. Throughout the operation, the new protocols provided useful structure without constraining necessary improvisation." She paused, scanning the faces before her. "That said, the real test of any protocol isn't how it functions when partially implemented in controlled conditions. It's how it holds up when everything else is failing simultaneously in an environment actively trying to kill you." A ripple of grin acknowledgement passed through the assembled teams. They understood the distinction she was drawing between training, however realistic, and the chaotic reality of combat operations. For the next 20 minutes, Olivia provided specific observations on their performance strengths to be reinforced, weaknesses to be addressed, and recommendations for protocol modifications. She spoke with the direct clarity of someone who had lived the scenarios they were simulating, offering insights that bridged the gap between theoretical design and practical application. "The most significant improvement I observed," she concluded, "was in the coordination between specialized elements. In Kandahar, we operated as effectively independent units with common objectives, but limited integration. Today's exercise demonstrated the force multiplication effect of truly integrated teams operating with shared awareness and coordinated decision-making." She paused, considering whether to continue with her final observation. It was personal, perhaps too personal for a formal assessment, but contained a truth she believed they needed to hear. "There's one element no protocol can fully address," she said finally. "The human cost of the decisions you make in these operations. When you prioritize one casualty over another, when you commit resources to one objective at the expense of another, when you decide who can be saved and who cannot, those choices stay with you long after the operation concludes." The room had grown completely silent, every face focused on her words. "I can't tell you how to bear that weight," Olivia continued quietly. "Each of you will find your own way. What I can tell you is that the decisions you make are validated, not by their outcomes alone, but by the integrity with which you make them. If you act according to your best judgment, with the information available at the time, putting the mission and your people above yourself, then you have fulfilled your duty, regardless of whether fortune favors your choices." She straightened, shifting back to a more formal tone. "The protocols you tested today will help ensure that you have better information, more reliable communications, and clearer guidance for common scenarios. They will improve your odds of success and potentially save lives that might otherwise be lost. But they cannot and should not replace the judgment of experienced operators making real-time decisions in fluid situations." The human element remains the critical factor in these operations, your courage, your commitment, and your character when everything else is falling apart. With that, Olivia stepped back, yielding the floor to General Mitchell for the conclusion of the assessment. As the General provided final observations and future directions, Olivia found her attention drawn to the 3 lieutenants seated at the back of the hangar. They had observed the entire operation, and now were witnessing its professional evaluation, a level of education few new officers received before assuming their first commands. When the briefing concluded, the teams broke into smaller groups for specialized debriefs, the machinery of military training continuing its methodical process of improvement through rigorous analysis. Mitchell approached Olivia as the room cleared, the 3 lieutenants following at a respectful distance. "Excellent assessment," the general said. "Direct, specific, and grounded in operational reality. Exactly what we needed." "The teams are solid," Olivia replied. "The protocols show promise. With refinement, they could significantly improve outcomes in scenarios like Kandahar." Mitchell nodded, his expression suggesting he was already considering the modifications her assessment had highlighted. "The instructor position we discussed yesterday, have you given it further thought?" Olivia glanced at the lieutenants waiting nearby, their faces reflecting the impact of what they had witnessed over the past 24 hours. "I have," she said. "I'm interested. Send me the details, and we'll discuss specifics." A slight smile touched the general's lips. "Good. We need people with your experience shaping the next generation of leaders." He turned to include the lieutenants in the conversation. "What did you learn today, lieutenants?" Shun stepped forward slightly. "That effective leadership in crisis situations isn't about perfect plans or flawless execution, sir. It's about adapting to reality while maintaining focus on core objectives. That technical proficiency matters," Nguyen added, "but integration and communication between specialties matters more." Carter, who had remained thoughtful since the exercise, concluded, spoke last. "That the measure of leadership isn't found in how we perform when everything goes according to plan, but in how we respond when nothing does." Mitchell nodded, appearing satisfied with their responses. "Remember those lessons as you assume your commands. They may make the difference between success and failure when it matters most." He checked his watch. "I have a video conference with the protocol development team in 10 minutes. Sergeant Ramirez will speak again before you depart." With that, he strode away, already focused on the next phase of implementing the lessons from today's exercise. Olivia turned to the 3 lieutenants, studying their faces, no longer the polished, untested officers who had mocked her uniform just 2 days ago, but professionals beginning to grasp the weight of the responsibility that awaited them. "Questions?" she asked simply. "Many," Chun admitted with a small smile. "But one rises above the others. How do you prepare for making those kinds of decisions? The ones where lives hang in the balance and there are no perfect options?" Olivia considered the question carefully, wanting to provide an honest answer, without discouraging them at the outset of their careers. "You prepare by being honest with yourself about your capabilities and limitations," she finally said. "By developing your technical skills to the highest possible standard. By understanding the people you lead, their strengths, their weaknesses, their breaking points. By clarifying your own principles before crisis strikes, so you have a foundation for decisions when chaos engulfs you." She looked each of them in the eye before continuing. "But ultimately, you prepare by accepting that no amount of training or education can fully ready you for those moments. When they come, and they will come, you'll make the best decisions you can with the information and resources available, and you'll live with the consequences, whatever they may be." It wasn't the reassuring answer they might have wanted, but it was the truth as Olivia had lived it. And as she studied their faces, she saw not disappointment, but growing resolve, the first glimmers of the leaders they might become, forged not from polished appearances or academic excellence, but from the harder metal of self-awareness and genuine commitment to the profound responsibility of command. Afternoon sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Maxwell's Officer Development Center as Olivia sat across from General Mitchell, reviewing the formal assessment of the morning's exercise. The building, with its oak paneling and historical photographs of Air Force leaders, provided a stark contrast to the practical, mud-splattered environment of the training field they had left hours earlier. "The protocol modifications you suggested are already being implemented," Mitchell said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "Your insights on the psychological dimension particularly resonated with the development team. They're incorporating stress inoculation elements into the next revision." Olivia reviewed the document, noting how quickly her observations had been translated into actionable changes. "This is good," she said. "Especially the decision matrices for resource allocation under communication constraints. That would have made a significant difference in Kandahar." Mitchell nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Which brings me to the instructor position. After seeing you with those lieutenants and watching your assessment of the exercise teams, I'm even more convinced you're the right person for this role." He activated a display on the wall, showing a curriculum outline for the Advanced Tactical Leadership Program, a specialized course designed for officers transitioning to high-risk operational commands. "We've been developing this program for the past 18 months, Mitchell explained. "The goal is to bridge the gap between traditional officer training and the realities of leading special operations units. Technical competence, tactical decision-making, and psychological resilience under extreme conditions." Olivia studied the curriculum, recognizing elements that addressed precisely the challenges she had faced in Kandahar and throughout her career. "Who's currently teaching it?" "A rotating cadre of experienced operators, but we need a permanent lead instructor, someone who embodies the principles we're trying to instill." Mitchell fixed her with a direct gaze. "Someone like you, Olivia." The proposition hung in the air between them. 6 years ago, after recovering from her injuries, Olivia had declined similar offers, preferring to return to operational status despite the burden of the medal and the public attention it had brought. Teaching had seemed like a retreat from the front lines, a concession that her combat days were over. Now, with the perspective of additional years and missions, she saw it differently. The young officer she had encountered over the past 2 days, Chun with her quiet determination, Nguyen with his thoughtful analysis, even Carter with his journey from arrogance to understanding, they represented the future of the service, in a way that her individual contributions, however valuable, could not match. The position would involve curriculum development, practical instruction, and assessment of officer candidates, Mitchell continued when she didn't immediately respond. "Based at Hurlburt Field with the Special Operations Training Group, you'd have significant input into program design and implementation. Would I still maintain operational qualification?" Olivia asked, unwilling to completely sever her connection to the skills that had defined her career. Mitchell smiled slightly. "I anticipated that question. Yes, you would maintain your PJ certification and participate in regular training operations. This isn't about putting you out to pasture live. It's about leveraging your experience where it can have the greatest impact." Olivia thought about the exercise she had observed that morning, the teams applying protocols that incorporated lessons from her experience in Kandahar, potentially saving lives in future operations. CapCut AI voice-ready text, the ripple effect of knowledge transferred, lessons learned, wisdom applied in new contexts by new generations. "I'll need to review the full position details," she said finally. "But provisionally, yes, I'm interested." Mitchell's expression remained professional, but satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "Excellent. I'll have the formal offer prepared by tomorrow. Assuming you accept, we'd look at a transition date approximately 6 weeks from now after your current assignment concludes." As they completed the administrative details, Olivia found her thoughts drifting to the 3 lieutenants who had accompanied her through this unexpected journey. They would be returning to their scheduled duties tomorrow, heading to their first command assignments with perspectives perhaps somewhat different than when they had arrived at Maxwell. "Those young officers," she said as their meeting concluded. Chun, Nguyen, and Carter, they showed genuine potential. Mitchell nodded, gathering his materials. "I noticed. Carter, in particular, seems to have undergone quite a transformation. From the report Harrington gave me of your initial encounter, he had further to travel," Olivia acknowledged. "But sometimes the most difficult journeys yield the most significant growth. Would you like to see them before they depart?" Mitchell asked, understanding the unspoken request behind her comment. "If possible," Olivia replied. "There are a few more things I'd like to share before they begin their commands." "I'll arrange it," Mitchell promised. Officers' Lounge 1800 hours. They'll be there. The afternoon passed quickly as Olivia completed her formal assessment report and reviewed the details of the instructor position Mitchell had offered. The role would be challenging in different ways than operational deployment, less physically demanding perhaps, but requiring a level of introspection and communication she had rarely been called upon to demonstrate. Could she translate her hard-won experience into lessons others could apply? Could she articulate the intuitive understanding that had guided her decisions in moments of crisis? At precisely 1800 hours, she entered the officers' lounge to find the 3 lieutenants waiting, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and respect. They had changed from their exercise uniforms into more formal attire, though the effect was somewhat diminished by the fatigue evident in their postures after the intensity of the day's activities. "Sergeant Ramirez," Chun greeted her, rising. As Olivia approached their table, "We weren't sure we'd see you again before departing. I wanted to check in before you ship out to your assignments," Olivia said, taking a seat, "and to answer any additional questions that might have arisen after this morning's exercise." The 3 exchanged glances before Carter spoke. "Actually, we were discussing the exercise assessment and your comments about the human cost of decision-making. It's not something covered extensively in our training." Olivia nodded, unsurprised. Military education excelled at teaching tactical procedures, technical skills, and administrative processes. It was less adept at preparing leaders for the psychological and emotional dimensions of command, particularly in high-stress environments where life-or-death decisions were commonplace. "What specifically were you discussing?" she asked, wanting to address their actual concerns rather than offer generic wisdom. Nguyen leaned forward slightly. "How to prepare for making those kinds of decisions. You mentioned establishing principles before crisis strikes, but what does that actually look like in practice?" It was a thoughtful question that deserved a substantive answer. Olivia took a moment to organize her thoughts, drawing on her own experience and the lessons she had learned through success and failure alike. "It starts with honest self-assessment," she began. "Understanding your own tendencies under pressure, whether you become overly cautious or impulsively aggressive, whether you focus too narrowly or become overwhelmed by too many variables. Knowing these tendencies allows you to compensate for them when crisis hits." She paused, noting their focused attention. "Then you need to clarify your decision-making framework, the hierarchy of considerations that will guide your choices when there are no good options. For me, it's mission objectives first, then personnel welfare, then resource preservation. That framework helps cut through the chaos when everything is happening simultaneously." "But how do you apply that in the moment?" Chun asked. "When there's incomplete information, time pressure, and lives at stake?" "Imperfectly," Olivia admitted without hesitation. "You'll never have complete information. You'll never have enough time. You'll never have perfect clarity about the right course of action. Accept that reality now, before you're in the situation." She leaned forward, her expression intensifying. The goal isn't perfect decisions, it's the best possible decisions. Under the circumstances, you gather what information you can in the time available, apply your framework, make the call, and then commit fully to executing it. Hesitation and second-guessing kill more effectively than enemy action in those situations. Carter, who had been listening intently, spoke up. And afterward? When you have to live with the consequences of those decisions. The question carried weight beyond its simple phrasing. Olivia recognized in Carter's expression the beginning of understanding about the true burden of command, not the technical challenges or administrative responsibilities, but the moral weight of decisions that affected others' lives in profound and sometimes permanent ways. That's the hardest part, she acknowledged. You conduct honest after-action reviews not to torture yourself with what-ifs, but to extract lessons for future operations. You acknowledge the limits of your knowledge and control in the situation. You honor the impact of your decisions without allowing guilt or regret to paralyze you for the next crisis. She paused, considering whether to share the more personal aspects of her own experience. These young officers deserved honesty, not sanitized platitudes about leadership. After Kandahar, she continued more quietly, I spent months questioning every decision I made during those 18 hours. Could I have reached the downed helicopter sooner? Should I have prioritized different casualties? Was there a way to save Reynolds and Washington that I missed in the chaos? The three lieutenants remained silent, recognizing the significance of what she was sharing. What I eventually realized, what my therapist helped me understand, was that those questions had no definitive answers. I made the best decisions I could with the information and resources available at the time. Second-guessing them with the benefit of hindsight served no purpose except to undermine my confidence for future operations. How did you move past it? Nguyen asked softly. By accepting that leadership in crisis isn't about achieving perfect outcomes, it's about applying sound judgment under impossible conditions. Olivia met each of their gazes in turn. And by recognizing that the burden of those decisions is the price we pay for the privilege of leading others in service to something larger than ourselves. The conversation deepened as the evening progressed, moving from abstract principles to practical applications. The lieutenants shared their concerns about their upcoming assignments. Chun to a rescue squadron in Alaska, Nguyen to a special tactics unit in Florida, Carter to a training command in Nevada. Each position carried unique challenges, and Olivia offered specific insights drawn from her experience in similar environments. As they talked, Olivia observed the transformation that had occurred in these young officers over just 2 days. Their questions had evolved from theoretical to practical, their understanding from academic to experiential. They were beginning to grasp the weight of the responsibility awaiting them, not just the technical aspects of their roles, but the profound human dimensions of leadership in high-stakes environments. You know, Chun said during a lull in the conversation, when we first saw you at the graduation ceremony, all we noticed was your uniform. How it didn't match what we expected. First impressions are rarely complete, Olivia replied with a slight smile. But that's exactly it, Chun continued earnestly. We were trained to evaluate based on appearances, to judge professionalism by presentation. And we were completely wrong about what mattered. Carter nodded, his earlier arrogance replaced by thoughtful humility. I think about what you said, that the most important uniform isn't made of fabric, but of choices and actions. That's going to stay with me throughout my career. Good, Olivia said simply. Remember it when you're evaluating your own personnel. Some of the best operators I've served with would never win a uniform inspection, but they were the ones you wanted beside you when everything went sideways. As the evening drew to a close, Olivia realized she had one more thing to share with these young officers before they departed, something that might serve them when they faced their own moments of crisis and doubt. Before you go, she said, reaching into her pocket, I want to give you something that's helped me over the years. She placed a small worn coin on the table between them. It was a simple challenge coin, the kind exchanged throughout the military as symbols of unit identity and shared experience. This one bore the pararescue emblem angel wings surrounding a propeller, with the PJ motto beneath, "These things we do, that others may live." As they walked away, heading toward their quarters to prepare for tomorrow's departures, Olivia remained at the table, watching their retreating forms with a mixture of hope and concern. They were good officers with solid potential, but the true test of their character and capability lay ahead in the decisions they would make when theory met reality and the consequences of leadership became concrete rather than abstract. Lieutenant Colonel Harrington appeared in the doorway as the lieutenants departed, nodding to them as they passed. He approached Olivia's table with an expression of curiosity. "How did your special students turn out?" he asked, taking a seat across from her. "Promising," Olivia replied. "They're beginning to understand what real leadership entails beyond the classroom theories and training exercises." "You're doing, I suspect," Harrington said. "Mitchell told me about the exercise this morning. Quite an education for new officers." Olivia shrugged slightly. They were ready for it. "Particularly Carter, though I wouldn't have predicted that based on our first encounter." Harrington smiled. "People surprise you. Usually just when you've finished categorizing them in your mind." "A lesson I keep learning," Olivia acknowledged. She hesitated, then decided to share her decision. "Mitchell offered me an instructor position with the Special Operations Training Group. I'm going to accept." Surprise flickered across Harrington's face, followed by thoughtful consideration. "Teaching wasn't something you expressed interest in when we discussed your future options after Kandahar." "I wasn't ready then," Olivia admitted. "I needed to prove to myself that I could still function operationally, that the medal and everything it represented hadn't fundamentally changed who I was as a PJ. And now? Now I understand that experience only realizes its full value when it's shared." She glanced toward the door where the lieutenants had departed. "Those young officers will face challenges I've already navigated. If my hard-won knowledge can help them make better decisions when lives hang in the balance, then perhaps there's purpose in the pain I've carried since Kandahar." Harrington nodded slowly. "The best teachers are those who never intended to teach, those who found themselves drawn to it not by ambition, but by purpose." He smiled slightly. "And often by the impact of an unexpected encounter that reveals new possibilities." Olivia thought about the chain of events that had brought her to this moment. A promise to an old friend, an uncomfortable appearance at a graduation ceremony, a moment of mockery transformed into an opportunity for education. Small decisions with cascading consequences, just like the critical moments in combat that had shaped her career and earned her the medal she still carried. With such ambivalence, life rarely follows the planned route, she agreed. The key is recognizing when the detour offers something valuable. The following morning dawned clear and warm as Olivia prepared for her departure from Maxwell. Her bag was packed, her travel arrangements confirmed, and her formal acceptance of Mitchell's offer submitted. In 6 weeks after completing her current assignment, she would report to Hurlburt Field to begin the next chapter of her career, not as an operator, but as an instructor, shaping the next generation of leaders who would carry forward the lessons she had learned at such great cost. As she completed her final preparations, a knock at her door revealed Lieutenant Chen, alone and in her travel uniform. "Sergeant Ramirez," she said. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to say goodbye before we all departed." "Not at all," Olivia replied, inviting her in. "Your transport leaves soon?" Chun nodded. "In about an hour. Nguyen's already left for Florida, and Carter's flight to Nevada departs at noon." She hesitated, then continued with characteristic directness. "I wanted to thank you privately. These Past 2 days have changed my understanding of what it means to be an officer in ways my entire training program didn't accomplish. Olivia studied the young woman before her, poised, intelligent, and now carrying a deeper awareness of the responsibility she was about to assume. "You were ready for the lesson," she said simply. "Not everyone is." "Perhaps," Chun acknowledged. "But it required someone willing to move beyond textbook principles to the harder truths of leadership." She straightened slightly. "I want you to know that I'll carry what you've taught us into my command. The understanding that appearance matters less than substance, that true leadership emerges in crisis rather than comfort. That character ultimately determines success when everything else fails." "That's all I could ask," Olivia replied, touched by the sincerity in Chun's voice. "Leadership isn't a position or a rank, it's a responsibility and a commitment. Remember that when the difficult moments come, as they inevitably will." As they said their goodbyes, Olivia noticed Chun glance at the photograph on the bedside table, the team in Afghanistan before Kandahar, smiling in the sunlight of a day when possibilities still seemed unlimited and the harder lessons of combat remained theoretical rather than lived experience. "They would be proud," Chun said quietly, nodding toward the photo, "of what you've done with what they taught you, of how you're passing it forward." The comment caught Olivia by surprise, touching a deeper truth than Chun could have realized. Reynolds, Washington, and the others in that photo had indeed taught her about service, about sacrifice, about the bonds that transcended rank and regulation in the crucible of shared hardship. Their legacy lived not just in memories or medals, but in the lessons she carried forward and now would share with others. "Thank you," Olivia said simply, the words inadequate for the insight Chun had offered, but sincere in their appreciation. After Chun departed, Olivia completed her preparations and took one final look around the temporary quarters that had housed this unexpected chapter in her journey. The Medal of Honor rested in its case, ready to be packed away, still a symbol of sacrifice and service, but perhaps now carrying a different significance than when she had arrived. Outside, the Alabama sun illuminated Maxwell Air Force Base, where generations of officers had learned the principles of leadership before carrying them into the varied theaters of American military engagement worldwide. Today, 3 new officers departed with insights that went beyond regulation and doctrine, carrying with them the hard-earned wisdom of someone who had faced the ultimate test of leadership and emerged with lessons that could not be taught in classrooms, but must be shared. Nonetheless, as Olivia shouldered her bag and headed toward the waiting transport, she thought about the journey ahead, not just the physical transition to a new base and position, but the deeper shift from operator to educator, from executing missions to shaping those who would lead them. It would require a different kind of courage than she had demonstrated in Kandahar, a different form of service than she had provided throughout her career. Yet in this new role, perhaps the medal that had seemed such a burden might find its true purpose not as a symbol of individual heroism, but as a gateway to credibility with those who needed to learn what she had to teach. The faded uniform that had drawn mockery might become a badge of authenticity in a world too often concerned with appearance over substance. The painful memories of difficult decisions might serve as the foundation for lessons that would guide others when they faced their own moments of crisis. As the transport lifted off, carrying her away from Maxwell and toward the next phase of her journey, Olivia found herself thinking not of the past but of the future, of Chun deploying to Alaska, Nguyen to Florida, Carter to Nevada, and all the other young officers who would pass through her classroom in the years ahead. Each would carry a piece of her experience into their commands, extending the impact of what she had learned far beyond what she could accomplish alone. And in that realization, perhaps, lay the true meaning of the medal she carried and the experiences. It represented not a burden to be borne in isolation, but a responsibility to be shared with those who would follow. Not an endpoint marking a single act of courage, but a beginning that opened new pathways for service. The horizon stretched before her, bright with possibility and purpose. The uniform, faded by years of service, still carried the weight of experience and the promise of contribution. And the journey, though different from what she had envisioned, continued in service to the principles that had guided her from the beginning: duty, honor, and the profound commitment expressed in the pararescue motto that had become the cornerstone of her life's work. These things we do, that others may live. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.